Loading your transport is all about being observant. You may be the only person present during the loading process, so you must observe every aspect of the loading process. You are responsible for making sure it is done correctly. You need to be able to detect hazards and issues that might interfere with your ability to load products safely. And you need to be proactive in making sure terminal personnel know if something isn't right. In this module, you will learn the steps to follow when loading your transport at a terminal. Terminals store propane which can be delivered to the terminal by pipeline, by truck, or by rail. When you pull into a terminal to load your transport, you need to look for site hazards. Check for obstacles that might create an unsafe loading condition. Is there any debris on the ground? Is it snowing or raining? Will conditions be wet, slippery, or muddy? Does the surface look like it will support your vehicle? If there are no obstacles and the ground looks stable, park your transport as required by the terminal. Next, set the parking brake and turn off the engine. Remember, any internal combustion engine within 15 feet of the transfer must be shut down. Before you begin the loading process, put on the proper personal protective equipment, or PPE. Depending upon the terminal you are loading at and upon your company policies, PPE can include safety glasses, goggles, gloves, a hard hat, work boots, flame-resistant clothing, an apron, and/or other appropriate PPE. And don't forget that smoking, open flames, portable electrical tools, and extension lights capable of igniting LP gas are not permitted within 25 feet of a point of transfer while loading operations are in progress. Ensure you know the loading terminal's policy and your company's policy regarding all electronic equipment. Place chock blocks or appropriate wheel stops. Look at the loading area to check to see if everything looks as you would expect it to. Is there anything out of the ordinary? Inspect equipment you'll be using at terminals and make sure it's in the proper condition for use. Look for wear, cracks, and breaks. Be sure there is nothing that could become an issue during loading. If you find anything that you feel makes it hazardous to load your transport, inform personnel at the terminal, or, if unattended, check with your supervisor to find out who to contact. If everything is in order, you can start the loading process. You need to know the proper loading density, the maximum loading capacity of your vehicle, and how much propane you're going to load. You are expected to be trained in the proper loading procedures at any terminal you will be loading at. You could be issued a card or a personal identification number, or PIN, which may be needed at the terminal. Training could involve working with another driver, terminal staff, or watching a video. You need to be able to correctly perform all procedures before loading on your own. If you are issued a card or PIN, the loading process will be documented. The card must never be loaned or shared with another individual. First, check the fixed liquid level gauge on your cargo tank and record how much propane is in your tank before beginning the loading operation. Normally, this should read 0. If a grounding cable is required at the terminal, make sure it is connected before you transfer product. It's a good practice to check the valve connections and seals. Slowly remove the cap, ensuring there is no pressure. If there is no pressure, remove the cap. Open the cap and make sure the gaskets or O-rings are there. Ensure that they are not missing, broken, or cracked. If there is pressure, do not remove the cap. Check with your supervisor. The product transfer hoses attached to the terminal liquid lines are pressurized hoses. Most terminals supply these. Visually inspect the threads and the hose prior to making the connection. Whenever you fill a container, when the liquid level rises, pressure can build. Because of this, there are several loading configurations which can include 2 liquid lines, 2 liquid lines and a vapor line, and 1 liquid and 1 vapor line. Which process you use depends on the facility and its configuration. In the first configuration, 1 hose will be connected to your spray fill line. This line sprays the propane across the top of the tank, so less pressure builds up and the propane stays cooler. The other hose will be connected to the liquid line. This will fill through the bottom in the sump. Both lines will be pumping liquid and running at the same time. In the second one, you are adding a vapor return line to the steps above. The vapor line helps equalize pressure. In the third one hose will be connected to either your liquid or spray fill. The other line is connected to the vapor line to help equalize pressure. Once the connections are hand tight, additional tightening may be needed using a spanner wrench. Check to make sure they are leak-free. When loading your transport, the spray fill and bottom fill liquid lines flow in one direction, towards your transport. Terminal procedures will determine whether or not you return vapor to the terminal storage container. Slowly open the valves to your lines and start moving product. Liquid transfer pumps, also known as plant pumps, transfer liquid propane directly from the storage area, through the pump, and into the transport cargo tank. During the transfer operation, a qualified person must be in attendance at all times. This means that you must be within 25 feet of the cargo tank and have an unobstructed view of your hose connections in order to monitor the transfer operation and be able to activate the emergency shutoff valve if needed. When the loading process is complete, reverse your steps, turn off the valves, bleed the lines down, and disconnect and store the hoses. Replace the caps on the transport. Verify and document the amount of product loaded, the time of day, and that the product is properly odorized. It is customary for the loading terminal to inject a minimum of 1 pound of the odorant ethyl mercaptan for every 10,000 gallons of propane. If odorants other than ethyl mercaptan are used, the amount of odorant added may be different, subject to applicable regulations. Documents are often referred to as shipping papers or bills of lading. Handle the paperwork according to the terminal or your company's policy. Next, walk around the transport to make sure nothing has been overlooked. The hoses and ground cable have been disconnected. Valves are closed. The protective caps are in place and tight, and there are no open hose tubes. Remove and stow your wheel stops or wheel chocks. Before getting back into your cab, take a last look around your vehicle and the terminal. If any gate was locked when you arrived, make sure that it is closed and fully locked before you leave the terminal. There may come a time when you may need to load your transport at an auxiliary loading point. In some areas of the country, pipelines or conventional loading facilities might not be available. In these situations, propane may be hauled on rail cars and unloaded directly onto a transport. This type of transport loading requires specialized training and equipment. A transloader is used to accomplish this. Transloading is the practice of transferring products between modes of travel, such as truck, marine, or rail. The transloader is parked next to a rail car. An operator climbs onto the top of the rail car and connects the hoses from the top of the transloader to the rail car. Propane is then pumped out of the rail car. A compressor could also be used for unloading a rail car. This process uses differential pressures to push product out of the rail car. Once the rail car is emptied of liquid, the flow would be reversed and the vapor would be bubbled through the liquid in the transport in order to recover all of the vapors off the car. Otherwise, 1,000 to 1,500 gallons of liquid could remain in the rail car. Never attempt to load a transport using a transloader or compressor unless you have received specific training. Check with your supervisor about what your company's policy is for transport loading from a rail car. There may be times when you will need to load propane into your transport from another transport or cargo tank that is disabled. Again, be sure you have been trained in this process before you attempt it. Prior to beginning the unloading process, check with your supervisor about what procedures should be followed. As you have seen, loading your transport involves a number of steps. The first is to be observant. Take the time to look out for hazards. Inspect the equipment you'll be using at terminals to make sure it is in the proper condition for use. If something seems out of order, inform personnel at the terminal. If no one is available, contact your supervisor. Be proactive. That means making sure equipment and property is in the best condition possible, and if it's not, letting the appropriate personnel know so it can be fixed. This ensures a better day for you and no surprises for the next transport operator coming in to pick up a load.